The studio lights gleamed against the glossy table of The View, casting soft glows on the audience's expectant faces as the applause sign flashed and faded. Joy Behar leaned back slightly in her chair, smiling wide as the cameras rolled, welcoming the next guest with her usual warmth and sass. "All right, everyone, you know this next guy, Hollywood tough guy, father of four. Boston's on, please welcome Mark Wahlberg." The crowd erupted as Mark stepped on stage, waving, throwing a few playful punches into the air like he was stepping into the ring. He greeted each host with a handshake and a grin, hugging Sunny Hostin and giving Whoopi a friendly nod before settling into the guest seat beside Joy. "Man, y'all still doing this after all these years?" he joked, prompting a round of chuckles. "You bet," Joy quipped, "and we're still waiting on your cooking show." Mark laughed, brushing his hand through his hair. "I'm too busy making movies and dodging burgers." The opening was light, fun, the kind of banter that made daytime TV feel like family but under the table. Joy's notes had a few questions circled in red, questions that were not part of the pre-interview. Questions she knew would stir things up. She gave the producers a subtle nod before leaning in just slightly, her voice dropping a pitch. "So Mark," Joy said, her tone still sugary but with a sharpened edge, "you've got this new faith-based film out, very uplifting, very different from your action stuff. But I've got to ask you, how does that line up with some of your, let's say, colorful past?" Mark blinked, smile still holding, but his eyes narrowed just a hair. "What do you mean?" Joy kept her tone casual, leaning into the co-hosts. "For shared curiosity, I mean you've got some heavy baggage, right? Assault charges back in the day, some prison time, and now suddenly you're preaching faith and family values. Some people might say it's a little convenient." The air got denser, the audience chuckling less now, leaning forward instead. "That's not fair," Mark said evenly. "I've talked about that a lot. I've done the work. I've owned it, I found faith, and I've changed. That's what growth looks like." Sunny cut in gently, trying to ease the tension. "I think what Joy's getting at is the public perception. How do you reconcile that?" Mark shifted in his seat, his posture tightening. "Look, I'm not here to justify myself to people who only know headlines. I've made mistakes, but I've also spent decades building something better for my kids, for my community. If people don't want to see that, it's on them." Joy folded her hands, smile unwavering. "But don't you think the platform you have demands transparency? Real accountability, not just a rebrand?" Mark leaned forward, both elbows now resting on the table, his voice lower. "You're acting like I've dodged that, but I've done more than most to make things right. You bring this up like I've never addressed it. But where were you when I was out there funding scholarships, helping kids in rough neighborhoods? You didn't cover that. You just want to talk about things that happened when I was a teenager." Joy's eyes flashed, but her smile held. "Mark, we're not the bad guys here. We're asking questions the public deserves to hear answered. Isn't that part of being a role model?" Mark's jaw flexed. "A role model isn't someone who never messed up. It's someone who turns it around and leads by example. I came from nothing. I got into real trouble, but I climbed out. I didn't take shortcuts. And I sure as hell didn't sit on a panel, judging people from behind a desk." The audience reacted audibly, now some gasps, some applause, some nervous laughter. Whoopi raised an eyebrow but said nothing, watching the dynamic simmer. Joy's expression didn't break, but her tone cooled even further. "That's rich coming from a guy who built his brand on glorifying violence. You say you've changed, but you're still punching people on screen, playing macho roles, feeding into the same toxic image that got you in trouble in the first place." Mark leaned back slowly, crossing his arms. "Wow, so now we're blaming movies for real-life behavior. I play roles. That's my job. You think you don't perform for the camera? You think sitting up here firing off talking points is more authentic?" The tension crept from the table to the crowd, which had grown quiet now. Sensing this was no longer showbiz sparring, Joy laughed tightly. "Mark, I've been doing this longer than you've been famous. You're not going to intimidate me with the tough guy routine. We've had politicians, generals, whistleblowers on this show, and guess what? They don't storm out when they get asked a tough question." Mark's nostrils flared. "You keep poking people like they're punching bags, and then act surprised when someone hits back. You don't want answers, you want sound bites." Sunny tried to interject again, voice soft. "Maybe we can pivot," but Joy held up her hand. No, let him finish. "Go ahead, Mark. If this is all just a smear job, then tell us what you're really about beyond the image." Mark stood suddenly, pushing his chair back with a screech that cut through the silence. "You want the truth? The truth is, I'm not perfect. I've made peace with that. But I've worked damn hard to make sure my kids never go down the road I did. I give back every day. I don't need to sit here and be grilled like I'm on trial." The host sat frozen. Whoopi leaned forward, hands clasped. "Mark, nobody's putting you on trial. But you came here to promote a movie that's about redemption. If you can't handle being asked what that actually means, then maybe you're not ready for this conversation." Mark looked at her, face tight. "Maybe I'm not, Or maybe I'm just done explaining myself to people who already made up their minds. His voice was firm, but laced with frustration, hurt buried just beneath the surface. Joy crossed her arms, now abandoning the smile altogether. Then maybe don't come on a show called The View if you don't want other people's perspectives. Mark glanced at her, then at the other hosts, then out to the audience. Yeah, maybe I won't. With that, he pulled off the mic, clipped to his collar, and set it firmly on the table, not slamming it, but making a deliberate statement. The camera crew scrambled behind the scenes, unsure whether to cut to commercial, but the director, sensing viral gold, let the cameras roll. Mark turned on his heel and strode off stage left, the audience murmuring and shifting, a mix of disbelief and awkward applause trailing after him. Whoopi turned to Joy slowly. Well, that escalated, she said dryly. Joy nodded once. It usually does when ego walks in the door before humility. The studio stayed unusually quiet for a moment. Sunny looked down at her notes, closing the folder softly while Sarah N. sat frozen in wide-eyed disbelief. The producers buzzed in their earpieces, trying to coordinate damage control as social media feeds began to flood with real-time reactions. Clips were already being clipped. The audience was stunned, some clapping cautiously as others whispered among themselves. We'll be right back, Whoopi said finally, gesturing to the crew. The screen faded out awkwardly, the music cue stalling for half a beat longer than it should have. No one said a word as the stage emptied briefly. Behind the scenes, Mark Wahlberg stood in the hallway, breathing heavily, still wired with frustration. A producer tried to hand him a bottled water, which he waved off without a word. A staffer called after him, but he kept walking, phone in hand, head down. The echo of his boots on tile was the last sound before the backstage doors swung closed. Behind him, as the show returned from commercial, the mood had shifted, still professional, but heavier. Joy addressed the camera with a practiced calm. For those just joining us, Mark Wahlberg has left the studio following a heated discussion. We believe in asking honest questions here on The View, and sometimes that means conversations get uncomfortable. We wish Mark the best and hope he continues on the path he's chosen. It was a diplomatic line, but her voice had a steely edge. Whoopi glanced at the crew, then back to camera. Coming up next, we talk about Gen Z's obsession with astrology. Stay tuned. The audience laughed awkwardly, grateful for the tonal shift. But online, the fire had already caught. Hashtag Wahlberg walkout was trending. Opinions split fast and loud, some calling Joy brave, others accusing her of ambushing a guest. Comment sections flooded, Reddit threads exploded, YouTube thumbnails were already being generated with red arrows and clickbait titles, but neither Mark nor Joy commented for the rest of the day. The episode ended on a strange note: no wrap-up, no behind-the-scenes shots, just the credits rolling over muted applause. Everyone involved left the building with their own interpretation of what had just occurred. Mark didn't speak to any press, nor did he post about it. Joy simply tweeted, "We don't shy away from real talk on The View. Never have, never will." The silence from Mark's camp only added fuel to the fire. Podcasts speculated, headlines debated, and media outlets lined up to book either side for exclusive interviews. But no one really got closure. It was one of those moments, tense, real, and unresolved, that would live on far longer than the segment itself. Viewers at home were left with a sour taste, unsure who had gone too far, but knowing one thing for sure: something had shifted on that stage, and nobody was walking away unscathed.